The next level of your business needs a new you. You probably already know this on some level deep down, because there comes a point in the life of a founder when the strategies that built the business stop being enough to grow it. And this video is going to be for two kinds of entrepreneurs. So if you're in the first category, you've built a business that looks successful from the outside, it works, it's making money, but it's privately draining the life out of you. And if you're in the second category, you may love what you've built, and yet you can feel that there's a more extraordinary version of your business, a greater level of contribution, a more expressed and actualized version of you that's still unlived. So founders in the first category are being pushed by pain. And in the second, you're being pulled forward by potential. If either is you, I want to show you why your next stage may not be actually waiting for a better strategy. It may be waiting on the next evolution of you, and why I believe business is actually one of the greatest vehicles for your actualization, eventual transcendence, and of course, your enlightenment. And when you understand the initiation, the business can actually begin moving again, but not just by consuming more of you, right? Internally, you become capable of holding more vision, visibility, more money, more responsibility, more freedom, and more life without contracting back into the patterns that actually created your current ceiling. Externally, it also changes what the business can do. The strategy becomes more clear, your execution becomes more decisive, your visibility expands because you feel like you can hold more of it. Your leadership becomes more powerful, and you experience a greater capacity to receive money, create value, and build a business that can hold its next stage of growth without making you the bottleneck. The energy that was bound up in resistance becomes available for creation. Your strategy stops fighting your soul and actually becomes the structure through which it can move. And instead of trying to force the next chapter into existence, you actually become the person capable of receiving it, creating it, and stewarding it well. So by the end of this video, I want you to be able to look at your current plateau or the larger potential that's calling you forward and recognize what your business is asking you to become and what must be released and what your next move actually is. These are the exact principles that I've used to help 1,500 plus founders scale their businesses exponentially and generate an additional $2 billion in revenue. And before we go any further, I want you to hear this, because if you're a high achiever in business and you're anything like the founders that I advise, you likely hold extremely high standards for yourself. So nothing about this means that you failed. You're not behind. You didn't miss the secret strategy that everyone else understands. Sometimes the moment when your old way stops working is actually not evidence that you've lost your way. It's the first sign that a new paradigm for growth is becoming available. So if you're in the first category, you know how to work, you know how to solve problems, you know how to make money, you've bought the courses, you've hired the mentors, you've changed your offers, you've fixed funnels, you've rebuilt the team, and you've tried your hardest to be more disciplined. Some of it works, right, for a while. And yet privately, you may feel tired in a way that more sleep doesn't solve. You may say, consciously, you may say that you want the business to grow, but some part of you might actually feel relieved when things go awry because you don't actually know how much more the current version of the business can take from you. You procrastinate on visibility and then you judge yourself for procrastinating without admitting that more attention would actually feed a machine that you no longer want to operate. You may even resent the clients and customers that you once prayed for and then feel ashamed of the resentment, right? No one around you can see the crisis because the dashboard still looks good. If you recognize yourself here, take a deep breath. The resentment does not make you ungrateful. The exhaustion does not make you weak. Some part of you may simply be telling the truth before the rest of you has found the courage to listen. But that might not be your experience at all if you're in the second category. You may love the business you've built. You feel energized by the work, right? Nothing's falling apart. But yet you can feel the presence of an unlived life, of a version of your business that hasn't yet been brought into form, a larger contribution, a more truthful expression, an edge of your potential that you haven't yet met. For you, good is no longer enough. And even great feels strangely incomplete. It's not because you're incapable of satisfaction, but something in you knows that comfort and completion are not the same thing. You don't want to just spend your life optimizing a reality that you've already outgrown. You want to discover what becomes possible when all parts of you are finally integrated, coherent, and unleashed. In by extraordinary, I don't necessarily mean a larger business, a louder life, or just more impressive numbers. It may mean those things for sure, but what I'm talking about is a life that's lived at the edge of your capacity for truth, creation, love, service, and aliveness. A business that's actually worthy of the life force that's required to build it. And if this is you, you too are being initiated into something greater, and you're allowed to want that. You can have gratitude for the life and business you have right now and the desire for the life that's calling you. And all of that can exist in the same body. And you do not have to diminish what you've created to honor what wants to come next. Pain is one doorway to this, but potential is another. But whichever doorway you choose to enter, the familiar strategies eventually stop creating the growth. And that's by design, right? The same constraint may keep returning in a different form. You may work more, but you might be getting diminishing returns. You make more money, but you still cannot relax. You hire help, somehow you still become even more essential to the business. You create more visibility, and then you dilute the truth that would actually make that visibility matter. You finally get the freedom that you wanted, and then you fill every inch of it with more work. And eventually, you begin to wonder if you're the problem. And in a sense, you are. Just not in the usual shaming way that sentence is intended. You're not a defective component inside the machine. The business has just reached the edge of the identity, the capacity, and the way of being that created its current reality. The next phase cannot be built entirely by the same version of you, right? The current version of your business was created by a past version of you. It could be months ago, years ago, sometimes decades before. And the next version of your business will require a different version of you. So the invitation here is to see the business less like a problem to solve and more like an initiation. Your business is going to place on your path the exact conditions where the next evolution of you becomes unavoidable. And that's the paradigm I want to give you in this video. Because sometimes your next level will not come from more strategy, more effort, more hires, all the usual things. It'll actually come from the inner transformation that you keep hoping that the strategy will allow you to avoid. And for most of you, that's not a conscious thing. It's deeply unconscious. Most people think they started a business to make money or create freedom or change people's lives. And maybe you did. But your business may actually also be one of the vehicles that your soul has chosen for your evolution. You think you're building the business, but the entire time the business is building you. And I want to be clear that I'm not speaking about this from some mountaintop as though I've completed the curriculum and I'm coming back to you with the answer. I'm inside this journey too, because it's actually an infinite journey. I know the temptation to turn every invitation for growth into another problem to solve, another thing to optimize, another reason we decide we should be further along than we actually are. So I'm not asking you to judge the part of you that's afraid. I'm actually asking if we can become curious about what it may be protecting and what might be possible if it no longer had to work so hard. For a founder who's already created success, this often arrives as a sense of restlessness inside a reality that a previous version of you once prayed for. Nothing is necessarily wrong, and still something in you will not let you settle. And that restlessness does not always mean that you need a larger business. Sometimes it means you need to create one that feels more like a calling, a representation of your most audacious vision for your life. It's a quiet sense that there's something more that wants to move through you, more that wants to be expressed, more of you that wants to become available in your work. You try to reason with it. Who am I to want more when I already have so much? Why can't I just be grateful? Is this a calling or am I just addicted to growth? And these are honest questions because not every desire for more comes from your soul. Sometimes more is the wound trying to outrun itself. More money so I can finally feel safe. More recognition so I can finally feel significant. More reach so the people who've dismissed me before will have to admit that they were wrong. There's nothing shameful about discovering that your ambition creates those energies. Most ambition actually does at first. And you've seen this in all the big name people on YouTube, right? You can feel the wound that's driving them. And the wound is very useful in the beginning. The wound can get you moving, but we mustn't let it tell us where to go and how to build. Because when proving remains the engine, every achievement creates only a brief interruption in that feeling of not being enough. Then you need another achievement and another, right? That's the hedonic treadmill. The business grows, but the wound remains in charge, and its appetite only increases the more you achieve. But when you begin to heal the part of you that needed success as evidence of your worth, then the nature of your ambition changes. Some desires actually fall away, and other desires remain. They're quieter, they're deeper, they're more persistent, and you no longer need them to prove anything, yet they won't leave you alone. And this is often where calling begins for most people. Calling is what remains when proving is no longer required. And this is not a frantic energy, but it's relentless. You can ignore it for a year. You can make beautifully reasonable arguments against it. You can build a very comfortable life around not answering it. And for some of you, it'll always be there. It'll be like a little pebble in your shoe, not condemning you, but just waiting. Because I think some visions are given to us because of what they will create in the world. And some are given because who we have to become to actually bring them to life. Usually it's both. You don't really own a calling. It actually recruits you. It possesses you. It penetrates every inch of your consciousness. It makes itself so impossible to ignore because ignoring it creates a level of dissonance that will eat your soul alive. It places an image inside you that far exceeds your current capacity, and then it invites you into the long work of becoming its steward. And if you've already brought one meaningful vision into reality, the arrival of a larger one is really confronting because it sometimes feels like a rejection of what you've built. But instead, what it actually is an expression of trust. Because you've already demonstrated that you can hold an idea, you can serve it through uncertainty, and you can give it form. Perhaps more is being entrusted to you because you've actually shown yourself capable of stewardship. The new vision is not proof that the first one failed. It may actually be what the first one prepared you to receive. The gap between what you can see and what you can currently create may actually be the curriculum. God gives you something that you cannot build as the person you are now, because becoming the person who can build it is actually part of the gift. And that's why a calling changes the ceiling of a business. Without one, growth eventually asks for more discomfort than the ego can actually justify. Why endure another identity death just to add a zero? Why face more visibility, responsibility, uncertainty, and consequence when comfort is already available? Because at some point, money alone is not a strong enough reason to keep evolving. A calling is. It doesn't make the discomfort pleasant. It actually makes the discomfort meaningful. So let me give you a question to sit with. What would you build if you were no longer waiting for permission? Permission from your audience to evolve, permission from your industry to say something that it doesn't yet have the language for, permission from the people who actually benefited from the smaller version of you, permission from the success that you already created to risk becoming a beginner again, permission from your current identity to actually become someone it cannot imagine. And this doesn't mean burning down a perfectly good business because you had an exciting thought in the shower. It may mean making 10% of your life available to the thing that keeps calling. Give it a morning, give it a conversation, give it imperfect form at first. Enough space for the vision to show you what it is before you demand that it justify its existence. If you stay in business long enough, that calling will introduce to you every part of yourself that you've been able to avoid. It'll show you your relationship with being seen, with receiving, with money, with power, your worth, desire, control, commitment, rest, and of course, God. It will reveal the places where you perform, the places you hide, the places where you overgive so no one can accuse you of wanting too much, the places where you stay exhausted because ease would force you to confront the terrifying possibility that life actually wants to support you. And the bigger the business becomes, the louder all of this gets. Because growth doesn't just magnify revenue, it magnifies you. And this is what makes a business such a brutal and beautiful spiritual path. You can feel deeply surrendered during meditation, right? And then a team ignores your instructions, and suddenly we find out how surrendered you actually are. You can believe that you've healed your relationship with worth. And then it's time to name your price. And you can feel certain that you trust God, and then something doesn't go as you expected. The numbers stop moving and you discover what you really trusted was the momentum. Business takes every spiritual idea you believe and it asks you to embody it under pressure in public with money attached. That is a different curriculum. Your business can make you rich, but it can also help you free yourself from the unconscious patterns that have been running your life. And that's actually what I mean when I say your business can become a vehicle for your enlightenment. I don't mean some permanent state of bliss where you float 3 inches above the ground and you no longer have to answer Slack messages. I mean the gradual end of unconsciousness, seeing what's been moving through you and becoming free enough to choose whether it gets to keep moving through you. Every time your business exposes a pattern and you meet it with awareness instead of obedience, you wake up a little bit more. Every time fear appears and you choose truth, you wake up. Every time you release an identity that's become too small for what wants to move through you, you wake up. And every time you surrender the need to make the business prove that you're worthy, you become more available for the business to become an expression of your soul. This path is really demanding. I've been in this for a decade and a half, and it's challenged me and it stretched me in ways that I could not have even imagined when I started. But it's not a prison sentence. It's actually an invitation for more intimacy with your own life and your own business. More choice, more wonder, more of the joy that becomes available when you no longer have to spend so much energy hiding from yourself. We tend to treat every business problem as a business problem, right? Sales are down, so we need a better funnel. We need to spend more on ads. The content isn't landing, so we need a better strategy. The team keeps disappointing us, so we need better people. We're exhausted, so we need a better productivity system. And sometimes that's exactly right, because businesses do need strategy. They need good offers. They need clear positioning. They need competent people. They need a level of operational discipline and excellence and basic financial intelligence. God may have given you the vision, but he didn't give you an exemption from unit economics. And just to keep us honest, not every disappointing launch is going to be an ancestral wound. Sometimes the offer is just garbage, right? If it's not clear what you sell, who you sell it to, and how it can benefit them, it's going to be more challenging to get people to buy. Sometimes the follow-up was bad. Sometimes only a fraction of the people who needed to see the post saw it, and that's why your stuff doesn't convert. Reality still gets a vote. But sometimes more strategy simply makes the unconscious pattern more efficient. You build a better funnel while remaining terrified of making a direct invitation. You hire more people while refusing to relinquish control. You improve your content while making sure no one can actually feel you in it. You create a more sophisticated schedule for a life that your body's been begging you to stop living. The outer architecture improves, but the inner architecture stays the same. And eventually, the business reaches the limit of what that inner architecture can hold. Money doesn't create your wound around worth. It gives the wound a scoreboard. Visibility doesn't create the fear of being seen. It makes your agreement with hiding impossible to ignore. A team doesn't create your control patterns. It gives them the other human beings to organize themselves around. Rest doesn't create the fear that you're worthless when you're not producing. It actually just removes the activity that keeps you from feeling it. Growth doesn't cause these patterns. Growth increases the resolution on these patterns. Your business becomes a mirror so precise that eventually you can no longer pretend you don't see what it's showing you. And there are 2 ways to respond to that mirror. So you can blame the reflection. You can keep changing tactics, join another mastermind. You can hire more team members, move into a new market, find mentors, run new offers, install the latest new morning routine, anything that allows the identity underneath the business to remain intact. Or you can become curious. What is this moment revealing? What becomes possible if I stop treating this pattern as an enemy and begin treating it as an initiation, as a gift? Because the mirror is not punishing you. It's revealing the next place where you get to become more free. There's mercy and grace in that. Anything that you can see clearly is no longer condemned to live your life invisibly. The moment that a pattern becomes visible, choice enters the space. And choice is where freedom begins. This actually gives us a completely different paradigm for growth, right? The conventional paradigm understands growth through addition. More leads, more content, more people, more skills, more effort. The initiatory paradigm understands that expansion also requires transformation. What must you be capable of holding? What pattern can no longer be allowed to lead you? What identity must be released because it cannot enter the future that you keep asking for? What truth must become so deeply embodied, not just understood by the head, before the next architecture can stabilize around it? This doesn't replace the strategic question. It actually reveals the version of you who can answer it. So every business has two architectures. There's an outer architecture, which is your offers, the positioning, the content, the sales process, the team, the systems, the money. And there's an inner architecture. This is your capacity to hold a vision before you know how to create it, to be misunderstood without abandoning yourself, to receive money without immediately needing to prove that you deserved it, to create order without strangling the life out of what you're building, to rest without making rest mean that you've lost your ambition, to feel joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop, to let desire move through you without converting it into shame, urgency, or performance. Your outer architecture determines what the business can do. Your inner architecture determines what it can hold. This distinction matters because you can create an external result that your inner world is not yet organized to sustain. And if you do this, it will feel extremely hard, extremely challenging to stay at that level, let alone grow, right? You can generate $1 million and still feel unsafe possessing it. You can become visible to 100,000 people and still feel compelled to disappear. You can build a team and then unconsciously make yourself the bottleneck again because being needed is where your identity feels secure. You can create freedom and fill it with new obligations before your body has a chance to experience it. Look, from the outside, this looks like self-sabotage. From the inside, your nervous system is restoring the conditions that it knows how to survive. Your nervous system is always going to optimize for what feels familiar. Your system is not your enemy, right? It learned how to protect you using the evidence that it had. Some of these protections now create your very expensive ceiling, but they were not created because you were broken. They were created because some intelligent part of you was trying to keep you connected, accepted, or safe. We can honor this protection without allowing it to determine our future. We can't consistently hold what our entire being still experiences as dangerous. And this is why capacity matters. Capacity is not your ability to tolerate more stress. It's your ability to remain present as more energy moves through you. More money without constricting, more attention without performing, more responsibility without controlling, more desire without rushing, more rest without collapsing into guilt, more uncertainty without abandoning what you know. The point of inner work is not to become so regulated that nothing ever activates you. That would be just a very elegant form of death. The point is to stay in relationship with yourself while activation moves through you. To feel the fear without handing it the business. To notice the wound without making it the shadow CEO. To let the nervous system learn through lived experience that the thing that it once had to avoid can actually now be held. And that learning happens through action, right? You don't heal visibility in private and then become visible. You become visible in doses that your system can integrate. You speak, you survive being misunderstood, you notice you didn't die, you speak again. You don't perfect your capacity to receive and then raise your price. You name the price, you feel what comes up, you refuse to overcompensate, you receive. The inner and the outer architecture build each other. Action reveals a pattern, Awareness creates the choice. Choice makes the new action possible, and that action becomes evidence. And that evidence teaches the body that your new life, your new level is actually safe. This is how evolution becomes embodied instead of merely being cognitively understood. Slowly, tenderly, right? Your nervous system moves at a much slower pace. And this isn't going to happen as one giant heroic act of self-conquest, but through a growing body of evidence that says, hey, I can be seen and remain fully myself. I can receive and remain at ease. I can rest and I can remain powerful. I can grow without leaving myself behind. Vision is the ability to remain in relationship with a future before there is evidence for it. Now that sounds inspiring, but in practice, it can feel like unbearable tension. You can see something that doesn't yet exist, right? The next level of your business will be first conceived in your mind before it's brought into form, before you have the evidence that you can actually achieve it. You can feel the shape of it, maybe even the responsibility of it, but you cannot yet produce it. And beneath that tension, there can also be wonder. What an extraordinary thing to be visited by a possibility that doesn't exist yet. To feel life, to feel God entrusting you with a fragment of the future and asking whether you would like help to bring it to life. The vision is not only a burden to carry, it is the privilege of participation. You're being invited into co-creation with God, right? Most people, they feel that unbearable tension and then they discharge that tension in one of two ways. So the first pattern I see is that they shrink their vision until it fits their current capacity, right? And so they keep orbiting the same ceiling. Or they rush into premature ejaculation, premature action, because doing something, anything, feels easier than holding the unknown. By the way, this is why I teach my clients how business is a sexual act and how you fuck is how you show up in your business, because those two worlds are intimately connected. Stewardship asks for something different. Can you let the vision work on you before you force it into form? Can you distinguish the next true move from the move that merely relieves your anxiety? Can you keep listening after that first burst of inspiration? Because sometimes the first version of a vision is actually contaminated by the identity that's receiving it. The soul offers an impulse to serve. The ego immediately adds a metric, a valuation, and a keynote about the exit. That doesn't make the vision wrong. It just means that the vessel is still being clarified. There's no shame in that. We all meet revelation through the identities that we currently hold. The beauty is that the vision can keep teaching us how to receive it more gracefully. The vision purifies the visionary. It exposes the proving, the impatience, the attachment that's wrapped around the original knowing. And if you let it, what remains actually feels so much cleaner. Less about what the vision will establish about you, more about what wants to exist through you. This is the movement from ownership to stewardship. So at first, visibility looks like a marketing problem. You post more, you improve the hook, you find the viral title, you tell better stories, you build distribution. It's all useful, but eventually visibility becomes a spiritual problem. Are you willing to be seen as you actually are? Not the polished expert who's already perfectly resolved every single tension. Not the version of you engineered to be impressive, inoffensive, or impossible to reject. You, your real convictions, your actual desire, your most polarizing perspectives, your connection to God, your relationship with Eros, your voice before it's been sanitized into content. Look, most people, they don't fear visibility itself. They fear that visibility will remove their ability to control. You cannot control how you're perceived. You cannot control who projects onto you, who misunderstands you, who decides that you've changed and not for the better, who prefers the smaller, less expressed version of you that needed their permission. And when your work evolves, visibility may require you to disappoint the audience that your old identity worked so hard to earn. And that's why consistency alone does not create resonance. You can show up every single day and still remain invisible by never actually revealing anything real. You can manufacture endless content from behind an identity that no longer has any juice in it. The algorithm may see you, but no one's going to feel you, right? Real visibility contains risk because it carries a real signal. Some people will move closer, others will leave, right? Both are evidence that you've become more perceptible. But visibility is not only exposure, it can also be relief. The relief of no longer maintaining a version of you that requires constant editing. The relief of not having to hold up the persona that you created to feel approved. The joy of being found by people who actually recognize your real signal because it's actually finally yours. The tenderness of discovering that some people don't just tolerate the real you, that's who they've been waiting for. And you're allowed to move towards that visibility at a pace that your body can actually integrate. Truth does not require self-betrayal. You don't have to turn your private life into content or bleed in public to prove that you're authentic. The invitation is simply to stop abandoning what is true in order to control how it will be received. At a certain level, your next visibility strategy is the death of an old identity. The version of you who survived by being universally understood, liked, and palatable cannot lead the work that is actually trying to emerge. You have to let yourself be seen before you know how being seen will rearrange your life. That is the initiation. The next initiation is the initiation of receiving. Here, the business asks you if you can receive more, if you're willing to hold more. Not acquire, receive. Acquiring is active. You can chase it, you can earn it, you can wrestle it into existence. Receiving requires openness. It exposes your relationship with worth in a completely different way. Can you let money arrive without gripping it, apologizing for it, or immediately finding a way to give 3 times more than what was purchased? Can your work be valuable because it creates value, not because it cost you your health to produce? Can you hold more without making yourself wrong for having more? Many founders say that they want to receive while their entire business is architected to protect themselves from it. So they undercharge, they overdeliver, they avoid making the invitations, and they stay indispensable to every client. And then they wonder why abundance feels unavailable. But the pattern makes sense. If love once depended on you being useful, receiving without self-sacrifice can feel existentially dangerous. If belonging once required you to need less than everyone else, then desire can feel selfish. If money was unstable, possessing more may create as much activation as not having enough. The nervous system doesn't ask if your revenue goal is reasonable. It asks whether receiving it threatens your belonging, your identity, or your safety. So receiving is not merely learning to tolerate a larger number in the account. It's releasing the identity that equated goodness with self-erasure. It's allowing the circulation to complete. You create value, someone else receives it. They return value in the form of money, trust, gratitude, or opportunity. And instead of breaking the circuit by deflecting, discounting, or compulsively overgiving, you let the value come home. You let the appreciation touch you. You let the money support you. You let the business buy back time, beauty, health, play, and the spaciousness from which your best work can emerge. Receiving can become pleasurable, not as proof that you're more important than anyone else, but as a felt sense experience of participating in a world where value is allowed to circulate and return. This is what makes continued service possible. Receiving is not the opposite of service. It's actually what allows service to become regenerative. The next initiation is the initiation of order. And then, of course, the soul gives you the profoundly spiritual initiation of following through on your commitments. Because divine inspiration still needs focused action. Soul without form remains a beautiful feeling that fades quickly. Structure is devotion made visible. And structure does not have to feel like punishment, right? Because at its best, structure is actually care. Structure is the highest form of self-love because it remembers what matters when you're tired. It protects the space where creativity can play. It gives your team clarity, your customers consistency, and your nervous system fewer things to hold. A good container does not diminish aliveness, it amplifies it. It gives aliveness somewhere to dance. The system, the boundary, the financial review, the uncomfortable conversation. The thing you said you would do after the frequency passed and no one was watching. Because if everything is controlled, nothing unexpected can enter. This is a kind of psychological rigidity. Others use spirituality to avoid structure, which is basically chaos, right? They're waiting for alignment when what's required is an action on the back of a clear decision. A mature vessel, who you're being initiated into, can do both. It's strong enough to hold the voltage and empty enough to not predetermine what the voltage must become. This is the relationship between discipline and surrender. Discipline creates the container, and surrender keeps the container from becoming a prison. Self-leadership is how you demonstrate to the vision that it's safe to take form through you. You listen, you choose, you move. You release your demands that the move produce the exact evidence that your ego wants. Then you listen again. Strategy can become a form of devotion when you actually relate to it in this way. The next initiation is the initiation of rest. Now, rest may just be the most confronting portal of all, right? For a high performer like you. So if you feel your body tighten as soon as I say the word, then congrats, you're in very good company. You don't have to become good at rest overnight. You don't have to earn it by finishing every task, because we both know that the business will manufacture 12 more before lunch, right? There's no such thing as a perfect business. A business is basically a gigantic collection of open loops, right? Work can actually conceal a great deal. Work can keep you from feeling. It can make you feel necessary. It can create the sensation of control. It can postpone the question of who you are when nothing is being achieved. Work can become an escape mechanism. If your identity was built around feeling needed, being exceptional, then exhaustion can actually feel really strangely safe. No one can question your commitment. You don't have to confront whether the business actually works without your sacrifice. And you always have an explanation as to why you can't hear the quieter desires that are underneath the work. Rest removes the anesthesia. It asks you whether you trust the architecture that you've built to hold when you stop gripping it. It asks whether God is allowed to participate in your business, or whether you've assigned yourself all of God's responsibilities. And there's a deep exhale available inside that question. What if the business does not disappear the moment you loosen your grip? What if some of the intelligence that you've been asking for can only reach you once there's enough space to hear it? What if rest is not where momentum goes to die, but actually where deeper momentum can be allowed to emerge? And this is why ease is not simply a lifestyle preference. Ease is a capacity and a skill to be cultivated. It's a muscle. Can you remain open when things don't turn out the way you want? Can you create without stress or crisis as the origin point of your action? Can you experience spaciousness without immediately manufacturing a problem to solve? For many people, pressure has been the only reliable doorway into power. If you're ADHD like me, you find the deadline activating, right? It brings everything online. The emergency focuses you. The threat organizes your energy. If you don't have the pressure, then you lose access to yourself. And so the next evolution for you is not just better stress management. It's actually learning to access your power through desire instead of danger. Just imagine the quality of life that becomes available when your full power is not locked behind an emergency. You get to create because you're moved, because you're curious, because something feels beautiful, useful, or fun. And that's not less ambitious. It's actually a more generous source of ambition. And that brings us to Eros, the initiation of Eros. Eros is the current of life inside you that knows what it wants to move towards. It's not just sexual energy, it's creative energy, it's relational energy. It's the force that turns curiosity into contact and possibility into creation. So we've been trained to see this as frivolous, right? Something to enjoy after the serious work is done. But sacred work does not have to mean solemn work. Scale does not have to mean suffering. God can and actually does speak through delight, through laughter, through beauty, through joy, through turn on, through the idea that you cannot stop thinking about or smiling about. We're sometimes so prepared to meet God through difficulty that we miss the divine invitation that arrives as pleasure, right? Eros is information. It reveals where life is gathering, the ideas that have energy in them for you, the people who expand you, the work that returns more life than it consumes, the future that makes your body lean forward before your mind can justify it. A business disconnected from Eros can still be crazy profitable. It can be optimized, automated, and extremely impressive on paper. But if nothing inside you wants to touch it, the business is no longer an expression of life. It's become an extraction of life force. And eventually your market's going to feel that, right? Your words are correct, your strategy is competent, but your signal is dead. Now, this doesn't mean chasing every impulse. Some impulses are sirens meant to be ignored, because turn on without discernment creates chaos. Discipline without turn on creates a very efficient corpse. The work here is to find the clean current underneath the urgency, the desire that remains after you burned off all the dopamine, the quest that you still want to fulfill even when no one's watching or applauding, the form of service that makes you more yourself as you offer it. That current is often divine intelligence speaking through your body. And when you trust it enough to give it structure, something crazy powerful happens, right? Your work begins to return energy. It gives you more energy than it takes. Service becomes reciprocal. The business actually starts building you back. And you wake up with your soul on fire because you actually look forward to the work. You surprise yourself. Your customers can feel that they're being served by something alive rather than being processed by something inefficient. There's more laughter in the room. There's more beauty in the work. There's more of you that becomes available when the workday is over. Now, not every task is going to turn you on, right? Someone still has to reconcile the books. But the architecture as a whole becomes more alive. Structure protects Eros. Rest restores signal. And the work becomes a place where more God can enter matter through you. If you choose this path, growth will not feel linear. It's going to move in a spiral, right? The same themes will keep returning: visibility, money, perfectionism, control, trust, but each time at a higher octave. Now, this can feel discouraging. Like, I thought I already dealt with this. Why am I back here? You're not back where you started. The pattern returned because the next expansion actually touches a deeper layer. And you're meeting it with resources, awareness, and choices that the earlier version of you actually did not have. The return of a pattern is not proof that you didn't grow. Sometimes it's proof that life and God trusts you with a greater amount of energy because you've expanded your vessel to hold more. Being seen by 100 people is different fundamentally from being seen by 100,000 people. Receiving $10,000 is different from being responsible for 10 million. Leading 2 people is different from becoming the tuning fork for an organization that holds 1,000 people. The wound may be familiar, but the amount of life moving through it is not. This is what I call spiral growth. Every revolution asks whether the structure can actually hold more voltage without reverting to the old pattern. And often right before the outer expansion, there's an inner contraction, a season of unbecoming, the old identity that stopped working. The new one is not yet stable, right? The strategies that once produced momentum now strangely feel lifeless. Your usual certainty goes quiet, right? Your vision gets blurry. Now, you may interpret this as failure, but sometimes nothing's gone wrong. The geometry is reconfiguring. The version of you who created the current business cannot be the version who creates what comes next. Something has to die, the way a snake sheds its skin. Maybe the identity that you're always the smartest person in the room. The identity that needs struggle to feel legitimate. The identity that you're loved because you never have needs. The identity that can only lead when everyone agrees. The identity that calls control high standards. But death is only half the story. Something is also being born. A version of you who can receive without apology, lead without gripping, create without proving, rest without disappearing. And there can be grief in that birth, and there can also be a tremendous tenderness and excitement. And you may catch glimpses of the person who's emerging. It may be a cleaner decision, a new kind of courage, a moment of ease where panic used to live. And you realize that the future is already arriving through you. Now, this death can look deeply unproductive from the outside, right? You may not be working as much. You're not moving faster. You may be doing less, while some invisible architecture reorganizes underneath your life. I call this doing root work versus doing fruit work, right? Before the tree can bear fruit, the roots have to go deep. And before the tree can bear more fruit, the roots have to go even deeper so it can actually suck in the nutrients required to give birth to new fruit, right? Root work is invisible to the people outside. What people outside see is the fruit work. That's when you're harvesting the work that you did from before. So if you're in that season, please do not confuse quiet and this sense of lack of productivity with abandonment or with failure or that something's wrong, right? God is not only present when the numbers are rising. Sometimes it's in the silence where the roots grow deep enough to hold what you actually asked for. Now, I also don't want you to romanticize the season. Sometimes stuck is just stuck. Sometimes the offer just needs to be better and the sales need to happen. But don't automatically attack the pause with more force. Listen for what can no longer come with you into your next level. Because the transformation that you may be resisting may actually be the key to the growth that you keep trying to manufacture. Now, there is often one action you already know you need to do, right? Could be a direct invitation, could be a price increase, could be an apology, could be a boundary, could be a hire, could be a fire, could be the month off, could be the piece of truth that you're afraid to publish because the people who like the old version of you may not actually understand the new one. So you may keep gathering information around it. You may be in overthinking, analysis paralysis. You may be considering timing. You may be asking for one more sign. Sometimes that discernment is wise. Sometimes fear has simply become extremely articulate, right? Your body can actually sense misalignment before your mind can explain it. But sometimes resistance is the guardian at the threshold of a life and business that your current identity cannot enter. And that difference is actually subtle. You have to tune into it. Fear usually contracts the field around your identity. What is this going to mean about me? Will they still love me? What if I fail? What if it works, but I can't ever go back? Knowing is actually much quieter. It may still scare you, but beneath the fear, there's a kind of coherence, right? The yes feels more clear. The no feels more clean. And you don't have to eliminate the fear before you honor the knowing. Fear is allowed to come with you. You can place a hand on that part of you that's afraid and thank it for trying to protect you and still take a step forward. That is actually what courage feels like. It's not a David Goggins style domination of that part of you, right? It's actually the cultivation of a relationship. No amount of external advice is going to replace the intimacy that's actually required to hear that signal from your own intuition. Mentors can reflect something to you. Community can reflect the patterns you normalize in isolation. Jealousy can show you the qualities that you've not permitted yourself to embody. And judgment can actually expose the desire that you're trying to disown, right? But eventually, every mirror returns you to your direct connection with Source, to the part of you that can hear what's yours. The more rooted you become in that connection, the less your business depends on copying someone else's certainty. You can learn from everyone without abandoning yourself. That is what self-trust feels like. It's not the belief that you will always be right or things will always go your way. The knowledge that even when you're wrong and things go completely, unexpectedly to shit, you will still remain present enough to learn, to repair, and choose again. And then there's enormous freedom in that, right? Because you no longer need every decision to certify that you're wise, that you're aligned, or that you're advanced, that you have it all figured out. You just get to be human. You just get to experiment. You just get to play. You get to discover the path just by walking it. And I want to be precise here because, for some people, inner work can become a sophisticated form of avoidance. You can analyze the wound forever. You can regulate for 6 months. You can wait for total alignment. You can, build an immaculate relationship with the idea of action while still taking none of it, right? The soul does not need you to become perfect before you move. It actually wants your participation, and that participation can be playful. Your business doesn't have to feel like a final exam administered by God. It can just be a laboratory for curiosity, creativity, devotion, and joy. You can try something because it feels alive, listen to what reality says back, and adjust without making the result a verdict on your soul. Strategy matters because service requires contact with reality, right? Is the offer valuable? Does the market understand it? Can people find it? Do people want to buy it? Does your business produce more value than it consumes? Does it keep its promises? Right? These are spiritual questions as well. Reality is where devotion becomes accountable. And that distinction is that strategy no longer gets to sit on the throne. It becomes a tool. Your soul provides direction. Strategy creates the translation. Structure gives the translation form. And money actually allows it to continue sustainably. Service completes the circuit, right? This is the marriage: soul and structure, surrender and self-leadership, eros and discipline, God moving through a vessel capable of holding the voltage, always expanding the capacity for more light. And as that connection deepens, inspiration becomes a lot less derivative. You stop asking what content's working, and you actually begin hearing that voice inside that tells you what's yours to say. You stop forcing your business into someone else's model and begin architecting the form that allows your particular genius to express. You'll still study the market, you'll still learn from the people who are excellent at what they do, but their strategy becomes an input, not an identity. This creates a deeper kind of security, because if the algorithm changes, you become connected to the source of your signal. If an offer stops working, you remain connected to the intelligence that created it. If the business disappears, you can grieve it, but you don't disappear with it. You know that the source was never the funnel. The source was never the audience. The source was never even you in isolation. It was the relationship between you, God, the people you serve, and the moment asking for something new to be created. And that relationship can create again, right? That is divine trust in a form that you can actually use. Not a promise that every decision will always be right or things will always work, but the knowing that no outcome can sever you from the intelligence, love, and creative source from which the work actually came through. So when your business reaches a bottleneck, I want you to have 3 honest conversations with yourself. You don't have to conduct them with a knife at your own throat. Take a walk, sit somewhere beautiful, let the urgency settle enough that the truth does not have to shout over it. So first, what's true in the business? Look at the numbers, talk to your customers, examine the offer, the message, the delivery, and the economics, right? Second, what is this moment revealing in me? Where am I hiding? What am I trying to control? What can I not currently receive? What do I already know that I keep trying to replace with more analysis? What identity is this business asking me to release? And then the third conversation. What does service require now? Not what will make me look advanced, not what will soothe my fear fastest, not what guarantees the outcome, right? What is the most potent action in service of the vision, the customer, and the truth? Sometimes the answer is going to be strategic. You change the offer, you make the call, you fix the economics. But sometimes the answer is going to be internal. Grieve, rest, tell the truth. Let an identity die without rushing to replace it. Usually the answer is going to have both. An inner surrender followed by an outer move, because that's how the spiral continues, right? It's not an endless series of problems to fix. It's a living conversation between who you are, what you're building, and what life is inviting you to become. So if you know you're meant for more, I don't think the invitation for you is merely to just create more or work more. It's actually to become more available. And I want to say this gently. You're already worthy before you become any more available than you are today, right? The journey is not how you earn God's love. It's what can unfold when you begin building from the knowledge that that love was never in question. You become more available for the vision. You become more available for the truth that it will require you to speak. You become more available for the money and the responsibility that may come with it. You become more available for the parts of you that it's going to expose. You become more available for the life that wants to move through you when you finally stop making exhaustion the price of your worthiness, right? Your business can be the place where you endlessly reenact your wounds, or it can become the place where you finally see them clearly enough to choose again. The market will still matter. The numbers will still matter. The execution will still matter. Enlightenment isn't going to excuse you from reality. It will only bring you in more intimate contact with it. Now, every challenge has another dimension. The difficult client can show you the boundary that you still refuse to hold. The quiet launch can reveal how quickly you abandon yourself when the world does not respond. The influx of money can expose whether you know how to receive. The season of expansion can reveal whether your life has enough structure to hold the answer to your prayers. And the season of stillness can teach you that source did not disappear just because the numbers stopped moving. And there's a lot of wonder in all this. What a privilege it is to build something that can feed your family, that can serve another human being, that can stretch the edges of your capacity and return you to God in the same lifetime. And sometimes it doesn't feel like a privilege when you're inside it, right? Sometimes it's Tuesday, you need to make payroll, and there's a conversation on your calendar that you would rather avoid. But even then, something sacred can be happening in very ordinary clothes, right? This is how the business becomes a spiritual path. You don't have to turn every event and everything into a sign or spiritually rationalize bad decisions, but you can decide to just not waste the curriculum, right? You can let every season return you to your truth. You can let success deepen you instead of anesthetize you. You can let failure clarify you instead of define you. You can let joy guide you just as much that fear once did. You can let ease become evidence of coherence instead of a reason to distrust what's working. You can allow yourself to enjoy the life that you're building while you're still building it. You build the outer architecture, and then you allow the most extraordinary version of your business to build your inner architecture. And slowly, the person who once needed their business to prove their worth becomes the person through whom something worthy can be built. Now, there may be people whose freedom requires an expression of you that doesn't exist yet, right? Not because you're their savior, but it's actually because service is relational. Your willingness to meet your next edge changes what becomes available through you. The wound becomes wisdom. The wisdom becomes architecture. The architecture becomes a place where someone else can transform, right? Your evolution was never only personal, and it was never meant to be devoid of joy. The people you serve don't need the most depleted version of you to sacrifice itself on their behalf. They need the version of you who is alive enough to hear what wants to come next, resourced enough to give it form, and open enough to let the exchange nourish both of you. So maybe God did not give you this business because the business needed to be built. Maybe God gave you this business because you did. Not because you were deficient, but because there's more of you for you to meet, more love to embody, more life to enjoy, more beauty to make real. And if you let it, every sale, every fear, every expansion, and every act of surrender becomes part of the same holy work, becoming able to hold more life, let more God through, and serve from the overflow of who you've become.